So it sounds like you've really done an extraordinary job of aligning your values with your eighth grade self, curiosity around research. I know that you continuously teach a class on doing evaluation research. So you also teach. And you've just finished up your third volume and are about to launch your fourth. So you're also writing. So in every way, you're acting like an academic. You're teaching, you're writing, you're researching, but you're also doing the practical work that makes a difference in the field. So you are using your degree in a way that is truly exemplary. So thank you for sharing an alternative trajectory for folks that you probably didn't imagine when you were in graduate school, and is a useful model, because there's so many ways to use this passport that graduate school offers folks to make a difference in the world. So, I'd like to transition now to the final stage of our conversation, and ask you a little bit about some questions following up out of a recent study by the Migration Policy Institute and the Presidential Alliance that showed that 33% of students in higher education have an immigrant parent. So that's a stunning number, really, a third. And yet there's really not a whole lot of conversation or understanding in higher ed of the presence of these young people. So one category that we hear about is first generation to college, which has a parallel with immigrant origin young people, but it's not exactly the same. So I'd love to hear your thoughts of in what ways do you think immigrant origin first generation scholars' educational journey into the academy is similar and different from other folks who are first generation to college?
I find the similarity is oftentimes with first generation and potentially who's encompassing in first generation immigrant origin. But I always think about first generation Black students into college, right? It's oftentimes the ways that social capital is missing, places around marginalization that have occurred through a K-12 education system as well. And so in that way, you and then underpreparedness for the academic trajectory of college, right? Very much connected to the ways that access to opportunities happen in a K-12 education setting, but also coupled with schools that a sector of immigrant origin, first generation, and Black students attend throughout this country, which one starts with fundamentally under-resourced schools, starts fundamentally quality of teachers in schools, starts fundamentally around access or limited access to AP and honors, high rigor, and so those conditions now as you enter college, right, you want to go, but at the same time don't have the social capital or oftentimes the preparedness to enter higher education settings. And a lot of the tracking that actually happens, right, because I couple it so when you are immigrant origin, first generation, you have a language continuum. And your language continuum also gets racialized, right? Contingent upon if you're a Black immigrant origin student who speaks another language in relation to a white immigrant origin student. That educational experience is going to be very different if you're a Black immigrant origin student who speaks another language and if you're a white. You're already racialized. Language is already being racialized. Your academic trajectory looks very different than it would be if you're a white immigrant origin student. And then the ways that the school engages them, parents and caregivers, and the underlying assumption, right? So that's why I say I see them in a parallel way, in terms of how racism is operating, how discrimination is operating, and now you're quote unquote going to college, right? But there's ways that harm has already happened. The trajectory of systems, racist systems, have already operated simultaneously to give you full access to potential opportunities, and for many already have been tracked into different educational trajectories.
So it sounds like what you're talking about are a lot of similarities with the first generation to college category, which can encompass Black students, white students, and immigrant origin students. But I'd also like to hear if you think that there's some specificities of the immigrant origin students' experiences as first generation students. Something that you might think is left out from the higher ed folks' perspective, something they may not be thinking about. Or is there something specific to the immigrant origin first generation experience that folks would be thinking about?
What has to be considered is some of the underlying assumptions I think that go with a first generation immigrant origin student, and more from the context around what oftentimes not really understanding the ways that family plays a role in terms of the navigation, that as a first generation immigrant origin student, you are also navigating family responsibilities, and what levels of cultural responsibilities is well, that there might be families that don't find it acceptable for you to go live on campus, right? That you still living at home. Like, what? You're not going nowhere. Like, what you mean you trying to live on campus? You're not, right? And there's also this component that oftentimes there is a sense of responsibility still to the family, right? That you're still navigating that sense of responsibility to your family, which can encompass, right? You still might be supporting your family financially, right? You still got to contribute to your family financially. You're still contributing social emotionally to your family. That those expectations have not necessarily actually gone away. So
it's a lifelong obligation.
Those sectors of obligations I think are oftentimes not considered, and how critical they also become to the success of first generation immigrant origin students. And the other part is also, I think about what structures and systems exist and then colleges to just fundamentally support what might be sometimes writing gaps, right? Because again, right, we're talking about first generation, right? We're talking about really individuals who came to the U.S. At a critical age past language acquisition periods, right? And so navigating the pieces that require support around academics might look differently, right? And so if we're talking about equity for first generation immigrant origin students, we're saying that we're giving students what they need. We're not giving students the same. And I think that's what oftentimes higher education settings don't consider. It's like everybody's getting this, right? When in reality, we're not meeting what the needs are then of immigrant origin students.